Welcome, everyone. This is another one of my series of interviews with subject matter experts throughout the country. And today I'm so pleased to have with me Peter VanBuskirk. Peter is a former Dean of Admissions. He is also the author of Winning the College Admissions Game. He is also the president of Best College Fit. So welcome, Peter. We're glad to have you with us today.
It's good to be with you. Thank you.
So we have some questions for you. My class in UCLA comes from a lot of different backgrounds. They're from all over the world. And we've been studying different issues in college admissions. And so this week is our very last week. So this interview is very timely. Can you give us a little bit of information about yourselves, give us a little bit of background, and how you came to write and speak on college admissions?
Sure. Well, thanks. And by the way, your class sounds like a lot of fun. So I'm envious of that for you. I had spent the better part of 25 years working in college admission at Franklin and Marshall College. And I had the opportunity to go up through the ranks there. I became the director, then the dean of admission, and associate vice president for enrollment management. And over that time, my experience paralleled the evolution of if you will, of college admission from the gatekeeping role to the strategic enrollment management role. And it was rather fascinating for me to see how institutions change their perspectives with regard to the recruitment process. And one of the things that over time started to really grate at me was how there was a growing gap between the rhetoric and the reality. The things that we would say to students and parents about the process, and then the reality of what was actually happening with those applications when we went behind closed doors. And I saw it in my own experience, but I also kept hearing it in conversations with other admission officers as well. And that coupled with the fact that I would say in the early 1990s, I had the opportunity to become involved with some case study presentations with the independent schools of Los Angeles. Saw a rather unique opportunity to teach through the use of case studies, and developed something that I called the admission game as an interactive exercise for audience to learn more about how the selective college admission process actually functions. So what I've been doing first while I was with Franklin and Marshall, and now over the last 10 years independently as a business, is trying to reach as many people as possible around the country and around the world with a better understanding of how this college admission process works. And rather than telling them how it works, I reveal it. I give them the opportunity to hold applications and make decisions. But before we even do that, we take a look at the factors, the agendas, the hidden agendas, if you will, that influence the decisions that the admission officers will make. I give them some tools that are useful in calibrating the process as well. So it's been very gratifying for me to see that I'm able to help people make better decisions. And frankly, the program has become pretty popular. I'm entering my 10th year now as an independent speaker. I had written the book, Winning the College Admission Game, in 2007, and that's due for a revision, I believe. And I've also written the Prepare, Compete, Win, the Ultimate College Plan Workbook for Students that is now self-published, and I actually am dealing with that in some volume. So again, I regard myself now as an industry analyst, a thought leader, somebody who can perhaps provide some guidance with regard to how people understand the process. And I'm probably presenting to 100 different audiences around the country and sometimes outside of the country each year, and also conducting a number of workshops called What's My Story? It's a small group workshop for students who are rising seniors that help them with the application preparation and understanding or getting some insight into what do I put into this application. As you know, quite often students come into the process worried, what am I going to say? How do I set myself apart? What do they want to see? Mm-hmm. And this workshop really digs deep into who they are and what they have to offer. Students will often say, I don't know what sets me apart. And I'll say, you're just looking in the wrong place. They often know themselves by their credentials on the outside, but they don't really focus inwardly in terms of how they see themselves in the world. So I'm having a lot of fun with this, and I'm delighted to be able to talk with you and your students.
Well, this is probably a really good year to start, to be updating and providing more information because of all the different changes that are going to be going on admissions. And we've talked about SAT and the changes there and how monumental, that has been and what kind of waves that might have. We will also have the change in the financial aid, switching from a 1 year prior income to 2 year, or as has been termed, the prior,
Mhm.
which I
Mhm.
think is really a silly term, but that's the one that we're stuck
Confusing a
with
little
right
bit
now.
too.
And
Yeah.
then also then with new application formats, for example, the coalition. So of
Mhm.
those three different things that are especially our rising seniors, this year's juniors, are going to face in the college admissions process next year, which one do you think has the most lasting impact for the colleges? Which one is going to impact the colleges and their process the most of those three things?
I can see a multiple choice question coming up on a future test for your course. Um, it's interesting. I think the financial aid piece is going to have the greatest bearing. To tell you the truth, your question is which is going to have the greatest bearing on colleges. I don't know that any of them will really, because selective colleges are going to continue to kind of drive their own processes as they always have, and the colleges that are not quite as selective will probably be the greatest innovators in terms of how they use different technologies and processes. But I think that the financial aid piece will certainly give families an earlier understanding of what the financial possibilities will be and what the realities of access will be. And in some ways, it will help colleges to target students a little bit differently. However, I think there's some concern that colleges will push the admission process forward because of the prior. I'm not sure that's going to happen. Again, the very selective colleges are really bound by the calendar to see a full slate of information, and by full slate I mean information about candidates through the senior year.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be pushing application processes up into the junior year. Some of the less selective schools are already doing things like that. So
Right.
I don't know that prior is really having that kind of impact. The new test, it's interesting. The colleges really didn't ask for this. the new SAT, and it was thrown at them. And then that's why I think when you find a lot of families and students concerned about what am I going to do, I've been focusing on the old SAT. I've got good scores, but now they want me to take the new SAT. And if you were to ask an admission officer the question, can I submit either? Sure, not a problem. If you ask me the question, what do you prefer? We prefer to see the new test.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's a subtle distinction there between the way a family might hear a response from an institution. But generally speaking, I'm not aware of any institution that's going to take a hard line on this and say, well, you can only apply if you're sending in the new test. I think that there's going to be, at least for this particular cohort, some flexibility there for the students who've taken the old and have done well. I actually have a tip for families like that. And I just had a question yesterday that came to me by email. The mom said, my son's been preparing for the old SAT and he's done really well. Now he's got this new SAT. What should he do? And there's just a lot of consternation. And frankly, that's a good question to ask of a college representative. Have her son send an email to that rep and say, these are my scores on the old SAT. I think I did pretty well. Do I really need to take the new SAT? And then hear from the experts what they're going to say then.
Yeah, the big question on the SAT and ACT, are they going to mix the old scores with the new scores? And I don't know. What do you think?
Well, there's a question of what they will do and what they should do.
Mm-hmm.
They should not, because
Right.
the tests are different. And
I
it would
agree.
be like mixing oranges and tangerines. I mean, they look alike in many ways, but they're in fact different. But for as long as I've been around the process, this is part of the underside of what happens, is that in order to embellish their profiles, colleges will sometimes do things like that. They'll pull in a score from a PSAT or something that will enable them to plug a gap in the student's profile. So they should not be mixing them. They should not be super scoring across the two. However, I don't want to suggest it won't happen.
Right, right. So we talked a little bit about how the colleges might use this, and it really is going to impact families more on the financial aid side.
Mm-hmm.
And any other thing that you would add to that in terms of the families? So, the colleges are going to continue. And I think what people need to remember is colleges still have this business side. So they're going to do whatever they need to market and
Oh,
build
absolutely.
their school, right?
Absolutely.
So then how are families going to manage all this? They don't know and see all this. So what are your recommendations? What do you see for the impact for families in this next?
For the SAT, it's really pretty easy because we're dealing with one cohort, and once the pig and the python goes through, everybody's going to be dealing with the same test format. I would add that families that are concerned and confused about testing should recognize the test option that is afforded by over 850 colleges and universities. And I think, if a student's looking at a test optional school and has scores that are at or below the average for that school, there's nothing to be gained by sending scores in. So, there's some cynicism about the test option being a marketing effort on the part of institutions. I was at Franklin and Marshall when we went test optional, and I can assure you that first year when we transitioned to the test option was a pure delight. We could look at kids and not be concerned with what their numbers were going to be. I think when a school is publicly acknowledging the test results are not essential to their decision making, if you're concerned about how yours are going to measure up there, don't send them in. So I think for the family, the testing piece is going to move past, but that test optional piece, plus the optional ACT, every college in the country will take the SAT or the ACT, so choose.
Right.
I think with regard to the financial aid, the prior will give some peace of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in another cycle, families won't know what it used to be like.
Right.
Because they're going to live in the present, and the present means that they're going to be able to use data that they know for a tax year rather than data that they're trying to anticipate for a tax year.
Exactly.
And I think that peace of mind will help them with the targeting of appropriate schools a little bit earlier in the process. The one other piece that you mentioned that we really hadn't talked about was the alternate application, the coalition application. I'm a cynical perspective about that. I think that it's been a hastily conceived idea that is going to be very hard to implement at a lot of different levels. But I'm not suggesting that the current application process is perfect, but I don't see that the coalition application is going to introduce something sufficiently different that it will gain much momentum. I suspect it will die of its own weight. And frankly, for families, what does this mean? Nothing really, because colleges that have used the common application, and by the way, the common application has ironed out a lot of the problems that it had in its own transition a few years ago. So it's not quite as cumbersome as it had been. But again, families have a very short memory in all this. Unless a family's had 2 or 3 kids go through the process, they don't know what the issues of last year were. So I think that as long as the application requirements are clearly articulated by the institutions and families are connecting with the institutional representatives to sort that out, they'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. So in line with that, we talked about access and what that really means. So can you talk about that and what you see that as and what that really means?
Well, there's been an awful lot of talk, and this is the rhetoric and reality piece that is troubling to me. A lot of talk in over many years, frankly, about access, and we need to create more opportunity for students of socially, economically disadvantaged backgrounds, ethnic minority backgrounds. And a lot of the talk, there's certainly a political impetus out there, but that aside, a lot of the talk seems to emanate from the most selective institutions. And what bothers me is that the talk is doing little more than encouraging students into a sense of false hope. years ago, there was the discussion among the elite institutions that, well, with regard to low and middle income families, we aren't going to expect students to take loans. So the word on the street was you go to an Ivy League institution and you're poor, you're going to go free. They're not going to charge anything. And that was pretty exciting. And what did that do? It generated applicant interest. It did not generate new enrollment patterns. Now, in hindsight, those institutions have not measurably increased the size of their underrepresented populations. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be hard because those institutions, despite the rhetoric of the social and political correct rhetoric about we want to, we need to, we will do all these things to help kids, there's the net effect is that they're generating more applicant interest, but they're turning more students away. And I think that's part of my cynicism about the coalition as well. One of the points that they're making is that we need to encourage kids from disadvantaged backgrounds to apply. We need to give them another sort of credentialing opportunity. So, well, we've got this portfolio, and kids throughout high school can have a locker and they can collect information. And then when it comes time to submit an application to college, they'll have a sort of a non-traditional credential that will stand on their behalf. And wow, won't that be great? Well, my point there is that those kids applying to schools that will admit 1 out of 15, 1 out of 20, have to get past the numbers part of the process before the portfolio will ever be considered, and very few of them have a chance.
Right.
So I think that access, in terms of creating more opportunity for young people who might be disadvantaged in any way in the process, the true access is going to come at institutions that are very good places, but may not be recognized among the elite institutions. And I wish the media would give them more play because there are a ton of great schools around the country that serve a lot of students and serve them very well. And I think that we have to curb the mania toward we've got to get our kid to Harvard, because Harvard's not the panacea here.
Well, and having been one of those students, one of those first generation students who went to college, I ended up at a private school that it was nothing to them. And this is what I worry about for my students. It's not the academic side, it's the social side, because it wasn't a problem for people that I was around to go and spend $20 or something and just drop money at an event or something. And then they expected me to be able to do the same thing. Well, I wasn't in the same situation as they were. And so oftentimes I would not do things for that exact reason. And so I agree with you. I think there's a lot of disconnect, and that's where for access to truly be representative, they've got to address those things. Or students who have only been speaking English for 3 years, they're not going to have the 700 scores on an SAT or ACT. Right. They're going to be lucky if they have 500, and that's going to be exceptional. That's
Well, and many of them are coming from families and cultures that only know the elite institutions. So kids are coming into this country with the expectation that it's going to be an Ivy League education or else, and it simply isn't going to work out that way.
Right.
I had a couple thoughts, and they both slipped my mind, so I hope I come back to them on that.
So talk about best fit. So you've been, as part of your mission and the message that you've been given to families over the last 10 years, you've talked about best fit and what that means. And so can you share a little bit about your concept and your philosophy in terms of best fit and how families do that?
And good for you. You brought me back to one of those thoughts I had forgotten. And it connects to the question. One of the things that you hear an awful lot about in the media these days is the need to help undermatched kids get into the schools that they deserve to attend. And to your point, I think that the notion of match is a very superficial notion. It says that if you're the top kid in the class, you need to go to an Ivy League institution, which doesn't really recognize or acknowledge all of the social cultural aspects of going off to college and being away from home, being first generation, whatever it might be. And I focus on fit. And I believe there are 5 elements of a good college fit. The first is that the best college for a student is always going to be a place that offers a program of study that meets the student's needs. It seems pretty straightforward, but how often do students apply to colleges that are not good fits. In particular, how often do you run into students who apply to universities? The university application says, what will your major be now?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us now. And the student says to you, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I want to major in yet. Well, why are you applying to that institution? Any place that forces you into a box before you're ready to be there is not a good place. There are a lot of really good liberal arts colleges, general studies programs that would be really good matches for students. And I think that part of fit needs to be very aggressively addressed. The best college for a student, number 2, will be a place that provides a level of rigor or challenge that is commensurate with the student's ability and preparation. Again, many students work through high school to the point where they're really quite capable of achieving at a high level, yet they will choose institutions that will challenge them at a much lower level intellectually. They're having a great time. Mm-hmm. There may be other factors that determine why they've chosen that school, but they're having a great time. And after 2 or 3 semesters, their brains will rebel. I can do the work up here and you put me down here. And then that's when students start to transfer. So again, I think we need to be cognizant of where the students have been working in high school and the level of rigor that they're ready for in college, and help them find that fit. Conversely, the best fit is not necessarily that place up here when the student has been working to this level. If you get into that place up here, then you spend 4 years trying to prove you belong. Right. Rather than necessarily doing a good job.
Right.
Number 3, the best college for a student will be a place that provides a style of instruction that is commensurate with the way the students like to learn. And this is something that students miss completely. Mm-hmm. I think when you look at the world of education, they see 3,000 colleges that only differ by name and address. They're all the same. And they really aren't. So what I try to get students to do is think about the question, if you have a room of 30 or 300 students, do we all process the same information the same way? Well, no. We have filters that affect the way we see and experience things. Well, do you think all of these colleges teach the same thing the same way? Well, no, and they don't. Right. And I try to help kids understand that there's a pretty profound difference between a large school and a small school. And when a student says to me, I really value the hands-on experience, experiential learning is important to me. I give them a little bit of a quiz. If you could get a grade for the whole year by taking a test, writing a paper, doing a project, what would you choose to do? Mm-hmm. And if they say project, well, why project? Well, I'm not good at tests. I don't like to write papers. And yet their list of colleges shows about 5 or 6 schools that are 20,000 or larger. That's not a good fit.
Right.
So I need to recognize how they function in the classroom and try to project that into an appropriate place. And I think we would have a much higher graduation rate if we could educate children, young people, about making better decisions with regard to colleges that way. The best college for student number 4 is going to be a place that provides a sense of community that feels like home. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the reasons that a lot of kids struggle with going to college is that what they have at home is really pretty comfortable. They feed me, they give me a place to stay, they give me the car to use once in a while. My friends live right down the street. Do I really need to go? Well, mm-hmm. Yes. And if college is part of your future, why not choose a place that feels like home? It won't include all of your friends from home, but it will include people who will become friends for life, people who have shared values and interests, people who will make you better. And when you find that, it's easier to relax and do good work academically as well. And the last element of a good fit, and I think this is perhaps the most important, and this is overriding with regard to how families should think about this whole process. The best college for a student will always be a place that values her for what she has to offer. Values her, wants her. I mean, that will be the place that admits her, gives her what she needs or wants financially. It's the place that's seen what she's done through life and can see that trajectory and wants to be part of that trajectory for 4 years. They will invest. They will make sure that the student understands how they will support her in achieving her goals. This is huge, as you know, when it comes to cost and affordability. Families want to know, we can't afford all this. Well, if you insist on looking at places that might be the quote unquote reach schools, where you're less likely to be valued at a reach school. Right. You're going to be more valued at a target school. There's a whole lot that I do in my presentations about helping families to understand the pyramid of selectivity and where colleges are relative to each other in selectivity, and how to target schools that make an awful lot of sense. And I talk about the competitive playing field as well. But bottom line is that if families take nothing else away from the discussion, then the best school is a place that values you.
Right.
Then they realize that the control really rests with them to be thoughtful and intentional about this process. Find places that want my child, and there's a very good chance the money's going to work out. There is money out there in the world.
Right.
And as you know, most of the money that goes to students comes from institutions,
Right.
not from sources outside of the institution. So find the places that want you. They'll take care of you.
Right. Right. And it doesn't have to be the name brand that everybody, the top 10, 16 schools or whatever that everybody knows. And how do you communicate that with international? We have a lot of international students in our class, and, trying to communicate that to a Chinese or Korean parent or an Argentinian, how that's a much more difficult process.
How much time do we have? Well, I think that one of the important conversations to have there actually has to do more with the structure of an educational environment. Because when families from outside of the United States look at education in this country, understandably, they go with what they know. And that's going to be Ivy League or Ivy type, because that's what's in the news all the time. Mm-hmm. Well, what these institutions that they hear about are universities. So what is a university? It's a complex place that has an undergraduate, graduate, and PhD program. And when you apply to the university, you're not applying to the PhD program, you're
Right.
applying to the undergraduate program. And by the way, and this is for the benefit of all families, but particularly international families, what do you think makes a university most famous? It's the work that's done at the graduate or PhD program, because that's where the research facilities are. That's where the medical schools are, the law schools. The programs that are most often quoted in the world are those programs that are at the graduate PhD level. So what about this undergraduate? Well, they kind of get what's left over institutionally. When you look at the finances of an institution, the money spent first at the highest level of instruction, the PhD, JD, MD. I mean, that's where most of the money goes. And then the master's programs, and it's the undergraduate program that gets what's left over. So I think that's an important beginning point, because students coming from outside of this country see colleges not so much as educational places, but credentialing places.
Right.
And ultimately, if you're coming into higher education expecting to have an undergraduate degree and an advanced degree, well, let your advanced degree come from that place that is held in the highest esteem. But the undergraduate degree can come from any of a number of places that are equally fine, and frankly, I believe offer better undergraduate education than do the universities. And the other way to illustrate it with students is this, and I apologize if I'm getting a little too long-winded about this, but imagine if a person were just to receive a PhD and wanted to teach, and had chosen to teach in a university environment. And that person goes to the university, is hired. Now, who does that person want to teach most in that university environment? Well, typically, the recently minted PhDs want to be with like-minded people, so they want to be with the other PhDs, and that happens. So they do some more research. And by the way, it's important for families to understand that when somebody is hired into an institution to teach, they're typically put onto a tenure track. And tenure, of course, is that contract for life. And if you can get tenure, that's a pretty sweet deal. And it usually takes 6 or 7 years for one to prove oneself on the tenure process. And it's not easy. But the most important credential with regard to tenure is not teaching. It's not involvement in the community. It's not whether your students like you. It's the ability to produce scholarly activity. Yep. So you've got new faculty coming in. That's why they want to work at the highest level, because they don't have to teach as much. They can do their research, be around high-level students, and focus on their research, their scholarly activity, get tenure, and then maybe they can teach the lower-level students. So who's teaching the lower-level students all the time? The PhD students. Mm-hmm. At the college, the liberal arts college, that same professor who has the recent PhD has chosen to teach there because she wants to teach the undergraduates. There are no graduate students, but she still has to prove herself with regard to the tenure. So if she's going to do research, who will become part of her team?
Right.
The undergraduates, because there are no graduates. And this is the argument I would suggest. If you have a bright, ambitious student from any part of the world who wants to have an undergraduate experience that is, at the very least, strong preparation for a PhD type of involvement down the road, those liberal arts colleges are a gold mine.
Yeah.
And those places are not well known, or as well known coming from outside of the country. You go to those places, if the student applies herself in meaningful ways, there isn't anything she can't do. The student who has a problem is the student who comes into higher education, a smart student, a talented student, but passively assumes, I'm here, give me my degree, the world is ready for me. And as you know, they drive taxis too.
Right. I think that's really good words of advice, and it's something it gives us as counselors, whether we're domestic or international, fodder that we can use, because we tell these families this all the time. But coming from you, with your background and your experience and your knowledge, that helps give a lot of extra weight. So,
and it was interesting too, and I realize we're coming to the end here, but in my years at Franklin Marshall, I spent a lot of time recruiting overseas. So I was in Asia, I was in the Middle East, I was in South America, talking with families and students about education in this country. And I realized that I needed to first help them understand what was here, and that it wasn't just an Ivy League option, that there were a lot of possibilities. So I understand what you're talking about.
So if someone wants to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more, has some questions, how do they reach you, Peter?
Well, my website is bestcollegefit.com, and you'll find on the website an archive of all the blogs. I try to do a blog once a week, an article about the college admission process once a week. Again, at bestcollegefit.com. There's also a pretty in-depth description of programs that I offer, because again, much of my working time is spent in front of audiences trying to help them understand better this process. So that information is available there as well. My email address is peter@bestcollegefit.com. And I'm happy to hear from anyone with regard to questions about the process, or if you think that the things that I'm offering with regard to programs might be of interest to your students and parents. I'd be delighted. I go wherever I'm invited. I don't openly market everything. I'm very lucky that I'm kept busy because of viral marketing, if you will. But if any of your class would be interested in having me present to the students and parents of their schools, I'm currently working on my schedule for the fall, and actually some schools have started to book me for the winter spring of 2017. So I do all my own booking, so just get in touch with me directly if you're interested in something.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been very illuminating. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure I'll see you at an upcoming conference. So have a great day. Have a great week. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Cyndy. Thank you very much.